Hi, welcome to the first chapter of this course. In the first chapter, we would be covering one of the three critical main lines in the Manhattan system. So, what are they? The first chapter comprises of 8th d into c5. The second chapter is of 8th bishop d3. And the seventh chapter is on 7th bishop f4. Of course, we would go through them individually in separate chapters, but I wanted to start with the one which I found the most beautiful and the one which prompted me to write this course. I should also give credit to Grandmaster Kevin Go V Ming. He's also the chairman, CEO, or somewhat of this, of the Singapore Chess Federation. And he was the one who wanted me to check this out. This course is about getting initiative as black early on in the opening. So the traditional variations like the QGD or the Nimzo Indian, the Queen's Indian, focus on getting a playable position as black, where you try to neutralize white's strategic advantage. Our objective is completely different from this strategy. What we are trying to do is to put pressure early on in the opening so that white doesn't get a stable advantage. And we want to make things as complicated as we can and enjoy the struggle. What we are hoping to do is get the opponent out of their openings early on, get a fight on the board, and then crush them. As simple as that. The lines are tricky and complicated, but there's always a strategic goal behind the particular set of moves. I have tried personally to be as consistent as we can in our plans so that it's easy for you to remember. But of course, there are very concrete variations which you would need to memorize. All right. So before we start discussing the moves, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of how the chapters are going to work. Along with the concrete moves, I would highly encourage you to look out and make patterns in your brains about the kind of moves we are repeating. Since we are trying to be consistent, there would be similar patterns in different variations. And what we are trying to do is make one plan work as much as we can. All right. The idea is the more simple the plan is, the more consistent it is, it would be easier for you to remember those. That being said, we also have a dedicated chapter to typical plans and structures where you can go through them again. But it would be great if you could start looking at them from the first chapter itself. All right, let's start with white's first move, 1 d4. Before we go to the key position, I just want to highlight the strategic goals behind each and every single white's move. So with d4, what white does is white occupies this, controls the important e5 square, gains space in the center, and opens up the diagonal for the c1 bishop. What do we do in return? We play d5. Our lines can also be achieved from the knight f6 move order, but I didn't choose this one particularly because of two reasons. The first one is that if we start with knight f6, white's Trompovsky becomes a lot more stronger compared to 1 d4, d5, bishop g5, where this is a much weaker version than against 1 knight f6. The second problem is white has additional options like c4, e6, and bishop f4, or maybe bishop g5. And it's completely unnecessary to look into these things. If we are looking to play the Manhattan and the Gukesh QGD, we don't really need to use the 1 knight f6 move order, and we can use the traditional 1 d4 d5 move order and eliminate some of white's options. While preparing openings, it's especially useful if you can cut down the unnecessary stuff and transpose to variations where you know what is going on. The less variations there are in your opening repertoire, the better it is, provided they are good. All right. So with 1 d5, we gain space as basically what white did, and we open up the diagonal for the c8 bishop. White plays c4, gains space, and challenges our pawn on d5. The second plan is to play knight c3 and put pressure on this d5 pawn. And we play e6. So e6 has two strategic consequences. Let's start with the plan behind e6 and then its strategic consequences. So the idea of e6 is to recapture on d5 with the e pawn when white takes on d5. So c takes d5 is met with e into d5. We control the center and we don't need to take with the queen and bring it out early in the game. The drawback, however, is that this bishop on c8 is now shut down. We have opened up the diagonal for the f8 bishop, but we have intentionally shut down the diagonal for one of our bishops. Now, we usually in these QGD structures, we usually get it out with d into c4. All right, let me just erase one of the unnecessary arrows. Yeah. So what we do is we usually take on c4 and then either challenge white's center with c5 or play b6, bb7 and get the bishop out to this great diagonal. All right. White plays knight f3. White can also start with knight c3 and we play knight f6. Knight f3 transposes to this the fourth move of this chapter, while cd5, ed5, bishop g5 is the Gukesh QGD and is covered in the subsequent chapters. All right, knight f3, white develops a piece. We do the same, knight f6. Knight c3, white brings out the other knight. And now it's the move which I recommend is the first small surprise. We start by playing knight bd7. It's already not one of the main options, and usually it's considered to be slightly dubious because the knight on d7 isn't that well placed. The ideal position for the knight is the c6 square, but only if you get c5 and then knight c6 in. What we are trying to do is get a better version of the Ragozin variation. How? We want to play bishop b4, but white usually has queen a4 check in the line in this position, and we are forced to play knight c6. And this knight is not so greatly placed if the pawn is on c7. If it's on c5, well, that's perfect. But when the pawn's on c7, it's not so great. So what are we trying to do? We play knight bd7. We are threatening d into c4. And the second plan is to play bishop b4 without worrying about queen a4 check. The drawback, of course, that we can't get our knight to c6. All right, so in the first chapter, we would start with the main line here, which is bishop g5. White can also start with c into d5 and transpose, but transpose to chapter 2, not here. But let's cover bishop g5, the most ambitious move strategically. White brings out the bishop to the most active square, g5. It's putting pressure on the f6 knight and the d8 queen. But the problem seems to be that it can be attacked with h6 g5 and you have to make some retreating moves with the bishop. Now, white brings out the bishop to the most active square. We do the same. We play bishop b4 and now we have two threats. This plan is actually very common occurrence in this variation, the Manhattan, as well as the Gukesh QGD. The idea is to play h6, and if white goes back to h4, play g5, force the bishop back to g3, then play knight e4. White would probably play queen c2, and then we play c5 with the threat of queen a5. The idea is we are putting pressure on this knight on c3, and we are looking to get our queen out and put pressure on this center. So where is our play? Our play is around this knight, the center, and this bishop once it falls back to g3. What we are trying to do is we are making threats very early on in the opening, And it's sort of fighting, it's sort of displaying that we are fighting for initiative and we don't want you to play simple chess. Let's make it a real struggle. Of course, if we play h6 g5, that means we are spoiling our kingside pawn structure and we can't be slow. We have to be quick, we have to continue to make threats, or else white would be better strategically. Alright, so white plays e3, cd5 as usual transposes to chapter 2. So white defends the c4 pawn and is looking to get the bishop out with bishop d3 on the next move. We play c5. We don't start with h6 here. We start with c5. We are challenging white's center, and the idea is to play cd4, ed4, dc4, bishop c4, and then play against this isolated pawn, either by playing castle and b6, or playing knight d6, knight d5, and occupying the outpost on d5. It's fairly straightforward, and this is a very typical plan in the QGD structures, which would be covered in one of the following chapters. Alright, white usually plays c into d5. White releases the tension so that if you play bishop e2 or bishop d3, we can play d into c4, bishop c4, and c into d4. And the problem is e into d4. White doesn't want to spend time on this. What white usually wants is to take back on c4 in one go. But if you play stuff like bishop d3, you have to spend two tempos just to get this position. So white doesn't want to spend that time and thus takes on d5 first. I think the right move is c into d4 here, not d into c4. We start with cd4, ed4, and d into c4 to avoid the option of knight d4 and queen d4 here. But I'm sure that it's covered in one of the following chapters. And yeah, we'll look into this position. But the idea is to avoid the d into c4 line. All right, c into d5, we take back with the e pawn. And again, we are keeping space in the center, since now we have 2 pawns in the center while white has 1. The problem that the pawn on d5 is weak. So what does that mean? That we have to react accurately, we have to make threats, or else white would be better strategically. Okay, so there are 2 moves in the position. The main line, the absolute main line, is bishop d3, which we cover in the next chapter. But the most fascinating variation in the Manhattan starts with d into c5, which is the point of study for this chapter. So what is white doing? White is playing in the most ambitious fashion strategically and looking to pressurize our pawn on d5. What do we do? Do we take back on c5 with the knight or the bishop? No. Could you pause for a second and look for what you should do as black? Alright, if you have unpaused, you should play queen a5, pressurizing c3 and threatening knight e4, looking to increase the pressure over this diagonal. And this is already getting a bit dangerous for white. White's king is in the center while we are able to castle on the next move, which means that we have some chances to attack white's king as early as on move 8, as black, not as white. A very big difference. Okay, white has 3 main moves here. One is rook c1. The other is knight d2. This is possible, but not so great. And the third one is bishop into f6. Let's start with knight d2. So, what is white doing with knight d2? White stopping knight e4. Since the d2 knight attacks the e4 square. The problem that you're making a retreating move in the opening, which is usually not great. If you know the key opening principles, it's to get a new piece out in the game and not to make moves with the same piece twice. If you look at our play, let's go back to the first move. Okay. With every single move, either we gain control of the center or we bring out a new piece. knight bd7, bishop g5, bishop b4, getting a new piece house, e3, challenging the center with c5, cd5, we take back. Okay, we are forced to take, can't help it. D into c5, queen a5, getting a new piece out, and now knight d2. So we got all of our pieces out, and now we have, white is the one making a retreating move. Shouldn't be great, and we can play the fairly straightforward bishop into c3, b into c3, and short castle. We can start with queen c5 too, no big deal. But do note that queen c3 is not great because white can play rook c1, and then the pawn on c5 is kind of good because white is keeping an important extra pawn on c5, which controls a lot of important square. If we take on c5, the pawn on c3 is still weak and doesn't control any important square. But I would suggest to start with short castle, finish off the development, and then you can either take on c3 or c5 based on white's response. The following plan could be to take on c5, then play b6, play bb7, play rook a c8, and play against this weak pawn on c3 and the king in the center. So what you want to do is get all of your pieces out. Once you play queen c5, b6, bb7, rook a c8, then you can try playing rook f e8, bring the last piece in, and then play knight e4, knight e5, just get your pieces out, basically. Sorry. Knight e4, knight e5, get all of your pieces into the game and start attacking. All right. So instead of knight d2, white can also try bishop f6. This has been played by a few players, but I don't think giving up the bishop pair so early in the opening can be good. We just take back with the knight. And this also opens up the diagonal for our bishop. So the bishop on c8, which was shut down and is usually a problem in these QGD structures, is now open. We can develop it to g4 or we can develop it to f5. White plays rook c1 to prevent bishop into c3, b into c3. But we can play bishop into c3 here. B into c3. White, of course, can't play rook into c3 because of the pin, and knight e4 wins an exchange. So b into c3. And now we take back, and again, the plan is fairly straightforward. You finish your development with short castle, then play bishop f5 or bishop g4, get the rook out to c8, then the other rook to e8, knight e4, and play against this weak pawn on c3. The other idea for white, which is the main line, is to play, just a second. Yes, sorry. White can play knight rook c1. This is the main line and what was supposed to be the refutation of this queen a5 move. Queen a5 didn't have a great reputation because of the following line, but I managed to find a great novelty which changes things around. So what do we play here? We play knight e4, and we are increasing the pressure over the c3 knight as well as threatening knight into g5. Do note that we can't play bishop into c3 here. Why? Because if white can play b into c3, and if we play queen c5, bishop d3, it seems that it's very similar to the ninth bishop f6 and then rook c1 line. What do I mean? Let's compare this position. Takes, queen c5, bishop d3. Take a screenshot of this or snapshot in your head. And then let's go back and compare this position. It seems very similar, but there are a couple of major differences. Firstly, white has not given up the bishop pair, so white retains the bishop pair. That's a very big reason. The second reason is this knight is still stuck on d7. That means the c8 bishop is not getting out. And if it's not getting out, you have problems with the development. White would probably play castle on the next move and then play c4, eliminate this weakness and claim a small advantage due to the bishop pair. All right. So we go back and we can't play bishop into c3, and that's why we play knight e4. We are threatening the g5 bishop, the c3 knight. So white is forced to play queen d5 and accept the second pawn. Of course, with knight e4, we leave the d5 pawn unprotected, and white accepts the challenge and wins the pawn on d5. White can't defend the d4 c3 knight convincingly. So if you are making threats, the best way for your opponent to react is to play threatening moves as well. If I'm punching you and you're just defending, at some point you will crack. I'll get some jab from here or a hook, I don't know, whatever. But you have to make threats as well. You can't just react to my punches. You have to keep punching me as well. And that's what white's best idea is, to play queen d5. If you play queen d4, I can finish my development with castles, and then I'm threatening knight into c5, and probably bishop g4 or knight e6, challenging this bishop, and the queen on d4. Queen d5. So now white is 2 pawns up, but we play the obvious knight into c3, b into c3, bishop into c3 check. So we have recovered a pawn and we are checking the king. You have a choice to play between king d1 and knight d2. What would you choose? Yeah, if you choose king d1, bingo, that's the right option. It seems very strange because you're not able to castle anymore, but knight d2 is very passive. We just play short castle, and then we are threatening knight c5, and putting bishop b4, knight c5, or directly knight c5. And this pin is a big problem for white. How do you get out of this? You can't play bishop e2 short castle because the d2 knight would be hanging. And once I get knight c5 in, I have threats of bishop e6. This bishop on g5 is vulnerable. The pawn on a2 is hanging. And if I get all of my pieces in, I am about to crush you. So what should white do? White should play king d1. The threat is to play bishop c4, king e2, get the h1 rook out and tuck in. So bishop c4, king e2, rook d1, king f1, and just tuck the king into the king side. As black, we precisely want to stop that. But before we do any action in the center, we safeguard our king and play castles. What are we threatening? We are threatening knight f6 or knight into c5. What does white do? White plays bishop c4 and puts some pressure on this f7 pawn. If you develop your bishop conservatively with bishops e2, black just storms through the position with knight c5, and the king on d1 is in big trouble. This check is coming, and you can't really escape because the bishop on e2 occupies the important square. If you play bishop e7, attacking the knight and the rook, black has bishop d7 with the threat of bishop a4, and the king's in big trouble. Let's say you take on f8, I play bishop a4 check, rook c2, and now I exploit the poor position of the queen and king with rook d8. I'm threatening rook into d5, so the only way to not lose material is bishop d6. But after queen b6, threatening rook d6 and queen b1 mate, white is busted. Just look at the activity of our pieces, right? White is probably, all of white's pieces are in the way of stopping white's plans. White doesn't want the bishop on e2, so that king can go through e2. The rook on c2 is pinned. The d6 bishop, the d5 queen, everything is pinned. The rook on h1 is lying around doing nothing. So even if we are a rook down, doesn't matter because we are crushing it. All right, so let's go back to the critical position with bishop c4. And this was supposed to be the refutation of this line. White is threatening bishop e7, where we can't move this rook due to the hanging pawn on f7. And for a long time, players used to play knight f6, but after bishop f6, king e2, the king is now safe, And yeah, it feels like white is all right, and white keeps a small advantage due to the extra pawn. So what do we do? After bishop c4, this move might seem nuts, to put it mildly, but it's actually one of the most fascinating novelties I've found. b5. You're hanging the rook on a8. White has the option of c into b6 and then trying to exchange the queens when white's king is so weak. So why are we allowing it? Like, it just feels stupid to play moves like b5, where you're giving white what they want exactly from a strategic viewpoint. But bear with me. Let's look at one other line to understand why b5 is so strong. So in general, we want to play knight into c5. We get the knight out and we want to play bishop e6, challenge these pieces. But white has bishop e7, b6. Okay, we want to defend the knight on c5. However, white has bishop f8 with the double threat of queen f7 and queen a8. And we can't really play bishop e6 because of queen a8. And then white has a mate if we play bishop c4. So what are we doing with b5? We are forcing white to play c into b6. There are other lines like bishop b3, bishop d3, queen a8, and the main line goes with c into b6. And then we go knight c5. So we have given up a pawn even though we wanted to come to the c5 square. Why? Because bishop e7 runs into a into b6, and now the key point is the queen on a5 defends a8. We are threatening bishop e6, so bishop f8 isn't possible. And this was the whole point of playing b5, cb6, knight c5. We'll come back to this position, but let's look at the alternatives for white apart from taking on b6. So white can play bishop b3. White's retaining tension and wants to play bishop e7 again. What do we do? Again, if you remember, we want to fight for initiative. We don't care so much about material, but we want to get all of our pieces out. And we play knight f6. The threat is simple. We want to play rook d8 on the next move. Of course, we are threatening knight d5 right at this point. But with rook d8, we are also threatening to win the queen. So white plays bishop into f6. Again, if you play queen into a8, rook d8, king e2, b4 with the threat of bishop a6. White plays bishop c4, and this is the most beautiful move I have ever prepared. Black to play. Let's see if you could find out the beautiful sequence. Black to play. So kudos to you if you found queen into a2. Sacrificing the queen. Why? Because after bishop a2, bishop a6, we deflect the bishop. It's a check. The only way to defend is bishop c4. And bishop c4 is a mate, not even a check, mate, right in the center of the board with just these three pieces. Yeah. So white is what? White has an extra queen and an extra exchange, and yet they are mated. Can't do anything, right? So it's probably very beautiful, and there's a very high chance of you trapping someone. I have beat a GM with this trap, so I'm very happy about this. And if you get a chance to mate your opponents under 20 moves with such a forcing line, it would be amazing. So let's go back. White can't obviously play queen a8. And white can try bishop into f6. And here's another surprising move, which might seem odd, but is very strong. We play g into f6, not bishop into f6, because this brings the bishop out from c3, where it was excellently placed. And now on f6, apart from rook d8, we are not threatening anything. So white can play king e2 and get the king out of the danger zone. With gf6, okay, we are disturbing our pawn structure on the king side, but white can't really attack it. So it's not a big problem. And more importantly, we maintain this bishop on c3, which is humongously strong, and we are threatening rook d8 on the next move. White should play king e2, queen a8, again runs into the same trap, rook d8 check, king e2. Okay, you can't play king c2 because of bishop f5 check and you're losing the queen. King e2, b4, threatening bishop a6, bishop c4, and we again have queen into a2. It doesn't have that impact which we had on the previous move because we have already seen it. But come on, yeah, like sacrificing the queen on 19th move, mating your opponent on 21st, straight out of your opening prep, a dream for any chess player. And bishop a2, bishop a6, takes, the king is mated. Just look at these bishops, the rook. Feels very odd, but you are getting mated right in the center of the board. So white can't take here. White should play king e2, get out of the pin. But now black plays bishop a6. The threat is again to play b4. And if white plays bishop c4, renew the threat of queen a2 since this is under a pin. So white has only one good way to defend, which is to play knight d4, preparing to escape with the king to f3. And again, we follow the opening principles, the middle game principles, bring all of our pieces into the game and play rook a8. What we are trying to do, getting a piece out with a threat so that white is forced to spend additional tempo and we get an extra move. White can play queen f5, attacking f6 and keeping this pawn guarded. But we play b4 check, open up the diagonal for our bishop, king f3, and the very important bishop c8. The bishop served its purpose on a6, and now we are rerouting it to attack on this diagonal. If white plays queen f6, we have queen c5. The position is balanced, but I would much rather be black here than white. White has an extra pawn, but the king is so far out. Black has the bishop pair, and you're threatening to get the rook out. You are the one putting more threats. Okay, this bishop is fabulously placed, no question. But the pawn on f7 is well guarded by this rook. And if anyone can make attack the king, it's got to be black. And even in objectively equal positions, the side which is making threats is usually better. So why are threats so important? Simply because from a psychological viewpoint, defending a position is much harder than attacking. Why? Because you always have the fear of losing. So when you are defending, the chances of you losing are quite high. And in the back of your head, you are struggling with your emotions. You don't want to play that position simply because out of 10, probably 7 or 8 options don't work. While if you're attacking, even if one variation works, in the 9 sub variations, you would have plenty of lines which go in your favor. So you know that there's something in this position and you would constantly try to hunt for it. You feel good about the position because most of the lines turn out in your favor. While when you are defending, most of the lines turn out in your opponent's favor. You would think, oh, come on, I just want to get this over with. Please give me a way to get out of this position, right? And these things make an impact. So if we are talking about this position, black's going to play rook d6. Black has the threat of playing queen h5 check, and the king on f3, it's way too out. The king on g8, okay, it's well guarded. You can't really attack me. Knight f5 is not possible, and there is no check. So the king is not feeling so unsafe, while the king on f3, yeah, it's definitely under a lot of pressure. All right, so this was it for the bishop b3 line. Let's go back. Let's go back to this position. What if white plays bishop d3? So this releases the tension from the f7 square, but it also attacks the important h7 square, and white has provoked b5, which means the rook on a8 is hanging. Just a second. Okay, it's important to note that white can't play bishop d3 here because of knight into c5. With bishop c4, b5, bishop d3, we can't play knight into c5 anymore since queen takes and the queen is not guarding it anymore, right? So what do? We play b4, and again the threat is to open up this rank for the queen and threaten knight c5 or knight b6. White's best bet is to play bishop e7 here. As usual, taking the queen away to the corner of the board is not a good strategy at all. We start taking over the initiative and play knight into c5. The threat is queen a4 check, knight d3, or maybe just get the bishop out with bishop e6, bishop b7 and trap this queen. So if, let's say, white gets the queen back, now how do we continue? We bring out a piece with a tempo. This is a fairly common strategy, that you get a piece out with a tempo so that you get an extra move since your opponent has to defend against it. So bishop e6, bishop b7 wins as well, but this is simply much more easier to remember. Queen d6, again, include all of your pieces into the attack. Bring, as Jacob Agard says, bring all your toys to the nursery party and play rook c8. You got your last piece into the game, and you have multiple threats. You are threatening this, you are threatening this, you are threatening this. And if, let's say, white plays bishop c2, okay, one critical point which I forgot to mention is white does have the threat of bishop into h7, king h7 and queen f8. So with rook c8, we get away from those threats and defend the important c5 knight as well. With bishop c2, white gets away from the attack on the d3 square, but knight a4. We are threatening knight b2. This is vulnerable. And it's just so bad that white has no defense basically. So knight b2, if white plays king e2, sorry, what I mean is, let's say after knight b2, white plays king e2, we have bishop c4 check, and the king is basically getting mated, or you need to give up material with bishop d3. And yeah, you don't have any defense. Even this doesn't work. I guess, what was it? Just a second. Yeah, I guess just because of bishop c4 check, and then the king is in a lot of trouble. Secondly, you also, like, let's look at the relative value of the pieces. Black has a full rook down, but the bishop on c3 is an absolute monster. The knight is coming to b2. The e6 bishop is right into the game with bishop c4. While white's pieces, okay, this queen is well placed, no question. But the rook on h1 is dead. So it doesn't matter if we just take that piece out of the game, the material is equal from a dynamic viewpoint, not a static viewpoint. So if the rook gets into the game, sure, we are lost. But for the moment, the rook's out of the game. The king is stuck in the center. So it doesn't really matter because white is not able to utilize their pieces properly, while black is making the best of the pieces that are remaining on the board. All right. So white can't take on a8. If white plays bishop e7, so this defends the c5 pawn and attacks the f8 square. We play knight b6, force the queen back. cb6 obviously doesn't work because of queen into d5. And okay, white has a few choices here. Queen e4 is the strongest one, with the obvious threat of mating us with queen into h7. But okay, white can try queen c6 and queen d6 too. Let's start with queen d6. So what white is doing? Okay, white attacks the f8 rook. What do? We make threats. We are not spending time on rook e8, but again, we make threats. We want to mate our opponent. Knight a4 with the threat of knight b2. White takes. We give a check, force the king up, and we eliminate the key defender of white, the light square bishop, knight into d3. Okay, so if you play queen d3, we have bishop a6, and the queen's lost. So white needs to take back with the king, but this brings the king up very much, which means it's not safe anymore. And what do? Check, king e4, and as usual, we can take on f8 with the rook, but improve your pieces, attack with a tempo, rook d8. We force the queen away, probably white plays queen c6, and rook into f8. Okay, let's evaluate this position. White has a we have an white has an extra exchange, but just look at the king's position, right? I mean, I'm sure if it's a blitz game, it's 0-1 simply, but it's not blitz. Still, I would say defending this as black is extremely hard, as white is extremely hard. Why? Because the king is on e4. How do you get it to safety? As black, what we need to do is just make threats, and your opponent would crumble, make some mistakes somewhere. Okay. Our ideas probably include playing bishop c4, or we can try playing queen into a2 and play f5, or just play somehow get the rook or rook on f8 into the game, and just attack the king. The king shouldn't hide to a good square, and if we are able to, if we manage to do that, we'll have a very significant edge. Even if it's not an objective edge is in this position, I am sure any strong player would want to play black here. All right, let's go back. So white can't play queen d6. White can't play queen c6 as well because we get all of our pieces out. We play bishop a6 and target this unprotected piece on d3. If white takes, we take back with the queen, and we are threatening queen d3, we are threatening rook d8. The king's just busted. There's no defense for white. And yeah, these kind of moves, they might seem like a blunder when you're checking with engine, but when you think about it from a practical viewpoint, I'm sure your opponents would make mistakes like this. Why? Simply because a human cannot calculate all the variations well. And when you are putting pressure, your opponent has to defend. And as we have already discussed, defending is just not easy. You need to calculate lines again and again and again and again. And at some point, you're going to crack. Like the point of practical play is to put and pose problems which your opponent cannot solve. We are not engines, so we won't find the accurate move all the time. And that's what practical chess is all about. Just keep making threats, pose problems to your opponent, and they would crumble at some point. All right, let's go back. So white might even try playing queen e4. The threat is queen h7. So we shouldn't play a defensive move like g6, but fight for initiative with f5. So we are defending h7, but at the same point we are threatening, right? These are the kind of moves I want you to play. Just fight for initiative, look to make threats in every position, get all of your pieces out, and attack your opponent, right? We don't want to play the normal way of chess. We want to keep pushing, right? We want to keep the intensity high, keep making threats, and hope that our opponent cannot defend well, right? So we are punching continuously and we want our opponent to react. The best reaction is queen c6 now. Since bishop a6, there's a very concrete line which we are going to discuss. White can also try queen f4, but again, we get bishop a6, and that's basically what we want in these positions. The bishop on d3 is unguarded. If you take, I take back, and queen d3 is coming, rook a d8 is coming, rook f e8 is coming, the king is busted. You don't even have an extra piece. we have looked at lines where white has an extra rook and still they are not able to do something. In this position, they don't even have an extra piece. It's just a pawn. Why do we care? Like, it's just crushing. Queen f4, bishop a6. And okay, if you play queen d6, it's possible, but we play rook f7. Okay, this time we have to defend. If your opponent plays very well, you need to respect them too. cb6, white wins a piece, but we play ab6, and we are threatening either bishop d3, queen d3, and rook e7, or rook e7, queen e7, bishop d3. We are happy to give the exchange to keep the light square bishop on the board. And yeah, white is worse. White may defend with very concrete play, but black's play is so much more easier. And in a practical game, I see that in my experience, I would say that black should win this game 9 out of 10 times. Okay, let's go back. So f5, queen c6. White now is ready for bishop a6, which was not possible on the last move. Why? Because now bishop a6, queen a6, we are threatening queen d3, but white has a strong intermezzo with rook into c3. A desperate measure for sure, but after we take back the exchange, white has queen e6 check. So white's controlling the a2 pawn and centralizing the queen. We can't play rook f7 because of knight g5. And I'm sorry, not knight g5, that loses to queen d3, but knight e5. I'm sorry about that. We play king h8 and bishop f8. So we are a piece down. We can take back the piece, but that's a bit slow. What we want to do, get our piece out with a tempo and attack rook d8. If we play rook f8, white plays knight e5. Now white is making threats. The threat is the obvious smothered mate. And if we play rook d8 check, white has king e1. We don't have any more checks. Rook d1 is not possible, and white is threatening knight f7. We have no good defense against it. So what we do? We focus on speed. We focus on initiative. We make threats. Rook d8. Bishop d6. White defends the bishop and blocks the check. How do we continue? Get our pieces into the game. Queen d3 check. King c1. Okay, king e1 gives us the extra option of queen b1. So king c1. And it feels like as if white has got out of trouble. You know, we have no more checks. And, white has an extra piece. So what do we do? The queen's guarding the important a2 pawn, and we cut that off by playing knight d5. This is a very important move, but okay, it's a very concrete sequence. I don't expect your opponents to play like this, but let's say if you have played this once or twice in your database, then your opponents might come to know about your prep and they might try the best response. So I wouldn't personally mind if you don't remember these lines, but for the first or second games, but once you have played it a couple of times, then I would advise you to look into these variations more deeply and memorize this stuff. With knight d5, what we are threatening is to play queen e2 and then play queen b2. White can't play queen b3 anymore and defend against the threat of queen b2, king d1, c2, and queen. Okay, so white is forced to repeat here with bishop e5. White can't play rook d1 because after queen e2, in fact, we are just winning with the threat of queen b2. White is forced to play bishop e5, queen e2, and white needs to be careful and play bishop g7 check, king g7, and white has a perpetual with queen e5. King g8, queen e6, we have a perpetual. We can't go to f7 because of queen into f5, and we can't go to h6 because of queen e6 check again. Alright, so if white plays this accurately and makes a draw, we don't mind. After all, we are black. But I would find it really hard, especially at the club and intermediate level. In fact, even in master level games, that white finds all of this. Maybe if your opponent is at 2600 and in the best shape of their life, sure, they might play like this. But below that, I see no chances for this happening on the board. Yet, if they're extremely well prepared, this might happen. And it's good to know what you have to do against it. All right. So I hope that you absorbed the lessons. It's not about the concrete lines, but try to understand the nature of moves. What we are trying to do is just attack, 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 speed over material. Initiative is everything. We want to make threats. All right. Let's go back. Let's go back to the 14th move. So where were we? Yeah. Apart from bishop d3, white may also try queen into a8. White gets the queen out of the game and gives up the important light square bishop. We gladly accept the offer and take the bishop. And you know, in these positions, the light square bishop is far more stronger than the rook on a8. Why? Because there are so many light square weaknesses in the position. Plus, the c8 bishop is now unchallenged. The rook on a8 anyways wasn't doing anything much. So it just helps us. Plus, the queen is on the corner of the board. White plays queen e4, gets the queen back, and we play knight c5. Again, what we are doing, we are getting a piece out with tempo. We open up the diagonal for a bishop. The rook's now about to come into the game. And yeah, basically what we want to do is just get all of our pieces in. White might try playing queen c2. The threat is to play queen into c3. But rather than retreating, we march forward. We play knight a4. The threat is to play bishop f5, either knight b2 or bishop b2, knight c3, and make threats. Again, I would be probably repeating this for the 10th time by now. But yeah, just make threats. Keep on pressing in this variation. Let's say white plays king e2, gets the king out. We play bishop f5, get our bishop out, e4, get the last piece in, rook e8, and white's busted. The king is so badly placed. We can play rook e4, we can play bishop e4, and we'll for sure win some material. Okay, so now let's go back. Let's go back to the critical move, 14, c into b6. What do? We play the incredible knight c5. Okay, I remember computer showing that a b6 is fine too, but it's just fine. The computer chooses a into b6 initially, but knight c5 is an excellent practical weapon. So at some lower depths, Stockfish thinks white is better. As we go deeper into it, it's clear that white isn't better at all. In fact, if you are unprepared, white may easily lose this position in 5 moves. It doesn't matter what Stockfish thinks. What is more important is, are you able to put practical problems for your opponent? A great example of that are players like Richard Rappo, Jan Krzysztof Duda, Daniel Dubois. I mean, these players, what they do is they choose inferior options, and they know these are inferior options. It's not like they are unaware of it. They intentionally go into these options. Why? Because they want to get their opponent out of the comfort zone. And moves like knight c5, it's just that it's not even worse according to computer. And if it's not worse according to the computer and we get a new way to attack the king, it should be incredible. I'm sure if any top player looks at this stuff and their opponent plays dc5, they would go for it 100%. The main problem why this line is not so popular is, instead of 8 d into c5, players usually play bishop d3. But dc5 was very trendy at some point. So if they know that, okay, there's a variation with b5, cb6, knight c5, I'm sure this might come back into shape. In fact, I think b5 is a novelty which nobody ever played. And cb6, knight c5 is not the top choice of the engine. So your opponents have no chance of knowing this, which gives us an incredible leverage over them. Since, okay, let's imagine you are white in this position. Let me flip the board for a second. Let's try to think, all right? So you are white and your opponent blitzes out c b5, cb6, knight c5. If I am white, I would be thinking, oh my god, my opponent has unleashed something incredible. He's giving up a rook. And okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, it just feels bishop e6 is coming, queen a4. There are way too many threats. My king on d1 seems horrible. I just need to survive somehow. I wouldn't think about winning at this point. I would think of ways to just get out of trouble. And this mindset is what we are precisely playing against. We want our opponents to fear us. We want to go in complicated positions where they don't know much about the opening and exploit this fact. All right, let's go back. So, knight c5. White's best bet is to play bishop e7. White might try queen a8 as well, but as usual, we know that getting the queen towards the corner of the board, not a great strategy. What do? We play queen a4 check, rook c2. Okay, king e2 runs into queen c4, and then we are about to give a mate very soon. Rook c2. And what do? Bishop b7. Just trap the queen on the corner of the board. If white's only way to defend is queen a7. Okay, queen f8, queen f8, king f8. White has two rooks for the queen, but this is hanging, this is coming. Just look at the difference in the activity of the pieces. And I think we shouldn't even be discussing about this position. It's self-evident that black is putting a lot of pressure. Bishop b7, queen into a7, queen c4. Idea, very simple. We want to play queen d3 check. We want to play rook a8 and trap the queen. The only way white defends here is queen a3. The threat is queen into c3. And now we need to get smart. So white is we have three pieces in one file. So the threat is quite strong. But if let's try to exploit white's poor positioning of the king and queen. So it's black to play, and pause the video and think if you can figure out a way to keep the material and then continue making threats. Okay, so if you have paused the video and now have unpaused, the best move is queen d5 check, king c1, and now the very strong bishop b4. You are making threats. You are defending the bishop, but by making threats. White can't take on b4 because of knight d3, and we are winning the queen. And if white goes for queen a7, knight d3 check, king b1, rook a8, and we are winning the queen again. Okay, it seems that white has a back rank mate, but luckily for us, we have bishop f8. And then we are threatening stuff like queen b5, queen b2, and okay, we are winning simply because of the magnitude of threats. We may also play h6 and get the king out and then continue the attack. White does survive without playing king c1 but knight d2. But after queen into g2, it's self-evident that we have so many threats. We are just an exchange down. It's just a dream position for black players. I would, top players would kill for getting this position as black. Okay, so let's go back to the most challenging move, which is 15, bishop e7. White threatens the f8 rook and the c5 knight. What do? We play a into b6. Now, this was the key concept of b5. We have defended the a8 rook with our queen and are now threatening bishop e6. Suddenly, the pieces which were very secured, the king on d1, queen on d5, bishop on c4, are now facing real heat because of bishop e6. And there's only one way where white remains better. White challenges us objectively, and that is to give up the exchange back with rook into c3. I'm sure this is already very difficult for white players because you just don't know what to do here. Let's say instead of rook into c3, if you play bishop into f8, you lose a lot of time. I get my pieces out with tempo, bishop e6. You play queen c6, I play bishop c4, and the king is busted. I want to play queen a2, I want to play rook d8. Just get my pieces in and crush you. As simple as that. White can also try bishop into c5. The point is, after bishop e6, white doesn't have queen e4 here. But after bishop c5, bc5, okay, if I play bishop e6, white does have queen e4. So let's say white plays king e2, gets the king out of the pin. We, as usual, bring out our piece with a tempo, bishop e6, queen d3, the queen goes back. And what do? Okay, this time we really exchange of some pieces to win back some material. So takes, queen a2, takes, king f1, and bishop b4. And this is the critical position where we can stop. The material's equal. The computer says it's equal, but if you ask any strategic player, anyone would prefer black. Why? Two reasons. First, we have a passed pawn, and passed pawns are notoriously hard to defend against. Um, the computer would defend it with great accuracy, but humans always face it annoying. The secondly is the activity of the pieces. This rook is incredibly well placed. The other rooks coming into the game, while white's rook on h1 is dead for the moment, you are not able to bring it into the game. And yeah, you have to spend some time. So it's fine objectively, but white needs to show a great deal of precision. While black, okay, you just play normal moves and hope that your opponent crumbles. And these are the kind of positions, where stockfish is sort of misleading, and you need your human mind to understand what's really going on in the position. Of course, with precise play, it's equal, but as usual, we are humans, we make mistakes while the computer doesn't. Let's go back. Let's go back to the strongest move, rook into c3. White eliminates one of the key defenders, key attackers, sorry, not the defender, but attacker. And yeah, we cannot play queen c3 because of bishop f8. And again, the a8 rook is hanging. So we don't have the option of bishop e6. What do? Very straightforward. Get a piece out with tempo. How? Bishop e6. And as usual, white's queen is in a somewhat of a trouble. So what should white do? Probably play queen d4 and defend the c3 rook. White can also play queen e5, but we can exploit this pin. How? By playing rook e8, bishop into e6, and rook into e7. Now we are threatening rook into e6 as well as to attack the king with queen a4 or rook d8. Once we win the pawn back, the piece back, the a2 pawn is hanging, the pawn on f2 is weak, and we are just one pawn down for an incredible attack. White's position doesn't feel comfortable at all, and in fact, computer already prefers black. So, white might try playing queen d4. This defends c3 and keeps the d file shut down for now. So rook a8 is not easy at this point. We still play rook f8 and attack the e7 bishop. So white has two options here. One is to play bishop h4 and the other one is to play bishop c5. Bishop c5 is a bit weaker. Why? Because we make threats. What do? P into c5, queen d2, and we continue making threats with rook e d8, bishop d3, c4. Again, we are not letting white rest, and we would win back material. And with such a weak king, it's clear that black is much better, at least from a practical viewpoint. Computer says it's better, but not much. But practically, it's just way too hard to defend a position with such a weak king. So you can try playing bishop h4. That's the best move for white. And yeah, already the position's getting a bit random. Although our moves are easier, white's moves are getting quite absurd. You play rook c3, then you're playing queen d4. You want to control the center, but with bishop h4, you are doing something else. Things are getting a bit random. But for us, our logic is very straightforward. We want to make threats, threats, threats. How do we do that? So, what I propose in this course, which is the most threatening move, is bishop c4. But a great alternative line could be h6 with the idea of playing g5 and rook a d8. Black is completely fine here as well, but to me, h6 move felt as if it's a bit slow and it might be harder to remember. If you can memorize it, great, then you can play h6 too. The thread's simple, g5, then you get the last piece out, rook a d8, and continue to make threads. What I recommend is bishop into c4. And the best move is queen into c4. Rook c4 is possible, and we have multiple choices. Queen a2, keeping the attack on, threatening this, a great alternative line. But what I would say is I want to get all of my pieces in the game, and that's why I play queen b5. This is a threat, playing queen b1, giving a check. But more importantly, I'm looking to get all of my pieces in, rook into a2, right? Any attack where multiple pieces are into the game is usually stronger and much more threatening than an attack with one or two pieces attacking. So yeah, why it's all right, why from a computer viewpoint, but from a practical viewpoint, this position is already very murky. And I fancy black's chances because you are the one making threats. You are attacking. Your opponent needs to defend. So queen c4, white defends the a2 pawn. What do? We get our last piece in, rook e4. Sorry, not the last piece, but a new piece in. Again, what we are doing, we are making threats, we are activating our pieces and forcing our opponent to react. The only move for white to not lose material, because this is threatened, is queen d5, counter attacking our rook. And how do we respond? By now, it's clear. We want to make threats. How do we do that? Rook b4. Threatening, rook b1 check. Again, what we are trying to do is include all of our pieces into the attack and keep making threats. Just keep making threats, include pieces, and keep on increasing the tension. At some point, your opponent would crumble. So, with rook b4, the threat is rook b1 check. White has two defenses. One is rook c1, getting the rook out of the danger zone, or including the last piece with rook e1. If white plays rook c1, we cut off the king with rook b2. And now we have an incredible set of pieces. White's king is on d1 is stuck. The rook on h1 is dead. And we have great attacking potential. Okay, this is a threat. This is a threat. And this is also a threat. And a2 is hanging. So there are multiple threats in the position. For white, it's just not clear on what they want to do. Again, let's talk about the psychological viewpoint. It's so hard to defend a position where all of your opponent's pieces are facing towards you, your king, and you just, you have to look around for all kinds of tactical ideas. Not an easy position to be as white. White can try playing rook e1, but as usual, we improve our pieces. We give a check, forcing move, improve the position of the queen, king c1, and again, knight e4. We are threatening the rook. We improve the position of our rook. And I think this is a good moment to stop. Let's just evaluate the position. So we have a much safer king. This king is so much worse. Our pieces are so much more active. Okay, white has only one active piece. The rook on c3 is in trouble too. Material wise, okay, we are significantly down. We are down a piece for a pawn. But apart from that, everything else is in our favor. Mainly attack. I think the most important elements in a position is activity and activity and king safety, which are in our favor. White does have material, which is equally as important as activity, but king safety, yeah. You are going to make threats. You are putting pressure. By now, your opponent has calculated so many variations that they would be tired. And from a psychological viewpoint, it's again so much more easier to play as black. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed this chapter and remember the key principles. Even if you forget the moves, just remember you need to attack, you need to get all of your pieces in, you need to make splits. See you in the next chapter.